The night my family handed me DISOWNED papers at a steakhouse in Charlotte, my sister was live streaming it to hundreds of people. My father said I had no place in the Hale family anymore. No inheritance, no future in the company my grandfather built. I said, thank you, walked out, and checked an email confirming a multi-million-dollar contract my company had just signed. 6 months later, the same family sat in the boardroom listening to a CEO explain the only technology that could save their failing business. Then he turned toward me and said, "The founder is already in this room." My name is Hale, and that was the moment my father realized the daughter he erased was the one holding the future of his company. Chapter 1. The dinner where my family erased me. The first hint that something about that dinner was wrong came long before the envelope touched the table. It was the room. The steakhouse in South Park was one of those places people in Charlotte used when they wanted a night to feel important. Dark wood walls, heavy glass chandeliers that looked like they had been imported from somewhere expensive. The kind of restaurant where every plate arrived under soft amber light, designed to make people look successful. My father had reserved the private dining room. That alone should have told me something. Through the tall windows, I could see the early September evening settling over the city. The heat of summer had finally loosened its grip on North Carolina. Cars rolled past slowly along Fairview Road, their headlights sliding across the glass like quiet reminders that the rest of the world was moving normally. Inside the room, nothing felt normal. My father, Gregory Hale, sat at the head of the table exactly the way he sat during board meetings at Hale Industrial Systems. His posture was straight, his shoulders squared. The navy blazer he wore made him look less like a man attending a family dinner and more like someone preparing to close a deal. He was 63 years old and had spent most of those years building Hale Industrial Systems from a regional supplier into a company that served manufacturers across the Southeast. Everything about him carried that history: the calm tone, the measured movements, the habit of speaking as if every sentence might eventually appear in a report. My mother sat to his right. Linda Hale had always known how to occupy a room gracefully. She had spent years moving between charity events, board meetings, and fundraisers. Even now, sitting in a restaurant chair, she looked as if she expected photographers to appear at any moment. Across from me sat my sister, Candace Hale, 35, corporate attorney in Atlanta, the golden child of the family since the day she graduated law school. Candace had always been beautiful in the sort of controlled way that required effort. Her hair fell perfectly over one shoulder. Her lipstick matched the shade of her dress. Her fiancé, Jordan Pierce, sat beside her, looking relaxed and confident, the way men tend to look when they have spent most of their lives believing the world will cooperate with their plans. And then there was me, Marielle Hale, 31 years old, recently finished with my MBA at UNC Kenan Flagger. Technically, the reason for the dinner. At least, that was what the invitation had said. The moment the waiter brought out the appetizers, I noticed Candace's phone. She held it slightly above the table, not high enough to look obvious, but not low enough to hide it either. The screen glowed faintly each time she tilted it. At first, I assumed she was texting. Then, I saw the red live symbol in the corner of the screen. I leaned forward slightly. "You are not live streaming this, are you?" Candace smiled without lowering the phone. "Relax," she said lightly. "It's just a little family moment." Jordan chuckled under his breath as if the idea of a live-streamed family dinner was mildly amusing. My mother did not react at all. My father continued cutting into his steak as if nothing unusual had been said. Candace angled the phone again. I saw the screen fill with fast-moving comments. Apparently, more than a few people were already watching. Something cold moved through my chest, but I stayed in my chair. That was the strange thing about families. Even when the warning signs were obvious, you still sat there hoping you had misunderstood them. Dinner continued. The waiter cleared the plates. A second bottle of Cabernet appeared. Candace adjusted the phone several times to make sure both my face and my father remained visible on the screen. Then my father wiped his mouth with his napkin and stood. The room shifted instantly. My mother lifted her wine glass. Candace held the phone steady. Jordan leaned back slightly as if settling in to watch something interesting. My father clasped his hands together in front of him. "First of all," he said, "congratulations on finishing your degree." I nodded. "Thank you. Education matters. Hard work matters. But character matters more than either of those things." His voice sounded calm and deliberate. It was the same voice he used during board meetings. He talked about responsibility, about tradition, about understanding your place inside a larger system. The kind of speech that sounded thoughtful on the surface while quietly preparing the ground for something else. I felt the tension building before he even reached for the envelope. It rested beside his plate. Thick white paper. He picked it up and slid it across the table toward me. The envelope stopped just inches from my hands. "What is this?" I asked. "Clarity," my father replied. Candace leaned forward eagerly. "Open it." I glanced at my mother. She avoided my eyes and took another slow sip of wine. So I opened the envelope. Inside was a legal document issued by the attorney who managed the Hale family trust. The language was formal and precise. Effective immediately, I was excluded from the Hale family trust. Any rights connected to inheritance, financial distributions, or ownership tied to the trust were terminated. There were paragraphs referencing family expectations, alignment of values, future financial structure. The entire document read like a carefully written explanation of why someone no longer belonged. For a moment, the words blurred together. My father sat back down. "You chose your path," he said calmly. "We are simply making ours clear." My mother spoke next. "Candace understands responsibility. She always has. She understands what it means to be part of something bigger than herself." Candace slowly tilted the phone toward my face. "Say something, Mary. Everyone watching is waiting." The nickname sounded sweet to anyone listening. It never had been. I looked around the table. My father sat with the calm expression of a man delivering necessary business. My mother looked sympathetic in the practiced way she used at charity events. Candace's eyes glittered with excitement. Jordan had stopped smiling. The strangest part was that I did not feel anger. Not yet. Instead, there was a sudden clarity that arrived when the last piece of doubt disappeared. For years, I had wondered if I had imagined the imbalance in my family. If maybe I had been too sensitive about the way Candace was praised while I was corrected. If maybe I had misunderstood the small, dismissive comments about my career choices. But a legal document removes all confusion. I folded the paper once, then again. Candace frowned. "That's it?" I placed the folded document back inside the envelope and set it gently on the table. "Thank you for making it clear," I said. My mother blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means I understand." My father's expression tightened slightly. Men like him prefer emotional reactions they can dismiss. Calm unsettles them. Candace lowered the phone just enough to look directly at me. "You're really going to walk out without saying anything dramatic?" "You're already handling the dramatic part," I said. Jordan shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable now. I stood and picked up my bag. My father said my name sharply. "Marielle." I paused near the door. "Don't make this uglier than it needs to be," my mother added. I finally turned and looked at them. My father sitting rigidly at the head of the table, my mother holding her wine glass with quiet elegance, Candace still clutching the phone that was broadcasting the entire moment. 4 wine glasses caught the chandelier light. Then I walked out. Outside the restaurant, the air felt cooler than I expected. Cars moved past slowly along the street. A couple laughed near the valet stand. The normal world continued without the slightest awareness that mine had just shifted. My phone vibrated in my hand. One new email. Arthur Chen. Subject line, "Contract draft approved." I opened the message and read the first line. "They're ready to move forward." I looked back toward the glowing windows of the restaurant where my family was probably still sitting under warm lights, convinced they had just closed the final chapter of my life. Timing, I said quietly to myself, had finally decided to work in my favor.
Chapter 2. The Daughter They Never Took Seriously. I was buying time, not from my family, not from the humiliation that had just been broadcast across someone's phone screen. I was buying time from the flood of memories that had started rising the moment I stepped away from that restaurant. When people hear a story like mine, they usually assume the betrayal started that night in Charlotte. They imagine a single dramatic moment when a family suddenly turns on someone. But families rarely work that way. What happened in that dining room was not the beginning. It was the final step in a pattern that had been forming quietly for most of my life. I grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina, in a house that always smelled faintly of polished wood and printer ink from my father's office downstairs. Hale Industrial Systems was not an old American dynasty. My grandfather had started it in the late 1980s with a warehouse and 3 employees who assembled mechanical components for regional manufacturers. By the time I was born, the company had grown into something respectable. Not a corporation that appeared on national news, but the kind of company that quietly supplied parts to dozens of factories across the Southeast. My father inherited it and expanded it. Distribution centers, long-term contracts, a reputation for reliability. Inside our house, the company was almost another member of the family. My earliest memories involved hearing about shipments, suppliers, and production delays during dinner. Candace fit naturally into that world. She had always been confident. Even as a teenager, she could walk into a room full of adults and speak like she belonged there. My father would bring her to company events when she was still in college. He would introduce her to executives and investors. "This is my daughter Candace," he would say proudly. "She is going to do something big one day." People would nod approvingly. I was there too sometimes, standing beside them, but the conversations rarely shifted toward me. I was the quiet one, the one who preferred laptops and spreadsheets to networking events. Instead of talking about law school or corporate strategy, I talked about data, supply chain efficiency, software that could predict shipping demand weeks in advance. To my father, those ideas sounded abstract. Candace talked about courtroom arguments and mergers. I talked about algorithms. In our house, those 2 things were not equal. The first time I fully understood that difference was in 2018. I was halfway through my MBA at UNC Ken Flagler. The program had pushed me towards something I had always been curious about, but never had the courage to explore seriously: technology inside traditional industries. Manufacturing companies like my father's were still running enormous operations with outdated systems. Inventory tracked in spreadsheets, shipping routes planned manually, forecasts based on intuition instead of data. I had started building a model for a software platform that could automate much of that work. One weekend, I drove back to Raleigh for dinner. It was just the 4 of us at the table in the dining room of the house where Candace and I had grown up. My father asked the usual question about school. I told him I had been working on something interesting, a logistics platform designed specifically for mid-sized manufacturing companies. He listened for a few minutes as I explained the concept: predictive shipping, inventory balancing between warehouses, software that could analyze supplier delays before they happened. Then he leaned back in his chair. "We have been running Hale Industrial for 30 years without Silicon Valley software," he said calmly. Candace laughed. It was not a cruel laugh exactly, more like the sound someone makes when they hear a child explain a science project. "That is adorable," she said. "You are starting a tech company now." I remember sitting there with my hands still wrapped around my glass of water, feeling the air shift in the room. My mother said nothing. My father returned to cutting his steak. That was the moment something settled quietly in my mind.
My family was never going to take that idea seriously. So I stopped talking about it. When I finished my MBA in 2019, instead of returning to Raleigh, I moved to Austin. Austin was different. The city moved faster. People talked about ideas the way my family talked about manufacturing contracts. That was where I met Olivia Martinez. Olivia had grown up in San Antonio and had been working as a UX designer for a small startup that had just collapsed. We met through a mutual friend at a co-working space and ended up talking for 3 hours about supply chain software and interface design. She was the first person who did not laugh when I explained the platform. She asked questions, hard ones. Who would use it? How companies would integrate it with their existing systems? How long it would take to scale? By the end of that conversation, we had the skeleton of what would eventually become Meridian Flow Systems. Building a startup is rarely glamorous. For the first year, our office was a rented corner of a shared workspace filled with people launching podcasts and mobile apps that would disappear within months. Olivia designed the interface, while I built the underlying model and tried to convince investors that logistics software for manufacturing companies was not the most boring idea they had ever heard. That was when Arthur Chen entered the picture. Arthur was in his late 60s and had spent decades investing in technology companies that most people initially ignored. He had a reputation for recognizing practical ideas before they became obvious. We met during a small investor event in Austin. I expected him to dismiss the pitch like most people had. Instead, he asked one question: how many companies like your father's exist across the country? Thousands, I told him. He nodded slowly. Then you're not building software for one company, you're building infrastructure for an entire industry. Arthur became our first serious investor. In 2022, Meridian Flow Systems closed a seed round worth $2.7 million. There was one unusual detail about the structure of the company. Arthur insisted that the holding entity appear publicly during the early years. Investors sometimes preferred experienced names attached to new ventures. That meant most clients interacted with Arthur's representation of the company rather than me. My name did not appear in many external documents. At the time, it seemed like a simple strategic decision. Later, it would become something far more interesting. While Meridian Flow Systems slowly gained traction, something else was happening in Raleigh. The pandemic had reshaped supply chains across the country. Companies that relied on older systems struggled to keep up with sudden disruptions. Hale Industrial Systems was one of them. 2 major clients left in 2023 after repeated shipping delays. Their contracts had represented a significant portion of the company's distribution volume. The board began asking difficult questions. My father was suddenly running a company that needed technological solutions he spent decades dismissing. Around that same time, I started thinking more about my grandmother. Eleanor Whitmore had died in 2017. She had been the quiet observer in our family, the one person who listened instead of judging. She never said much about my plans, but once, when I was in college, she told me something that stayed with me. Families like ours are very good at rewarding obedience. They are not always good at recognizing vision. When she passed, a lawyer named Daniel Hargrove took over management of a trust she had created. At the time, I barely paid attention to the details. I was too busy building something new. Now, years later, standing outside that restaurant in Charlotte with the email from Arthur Chen glowing on my screen, those memories connected themselves in ways I had not expected. I got into my car and drove back toward the small apartment I had rented while visiting the city. Later that night, I opened my laptop. The video of the dinner had already started spreading. Someone had clipped the moment when my father slid the envelope across the table. Someone else had reposted Candace's live stream recording. In alumni groups from UNC and professional networks on LinkedIn, the story was circulating with the speed of gossip that feels too dramatic to ignore. My phone buzzed with a message. "Olivia," I answered the call. "Your family just turned you into a viral story," she said. I watched the screen for a moment longer. "No," I said quietly.
They just made the ending impossible to avoid.
Chapter 3: The Scandal They Didn't Expect. The next morning, the video had already escaped the small audience Candace thought she was performing for. I opened LinkedIn and saw my own face frozen beneath the steakhouse lights. Someone had trimmed the live stream into a sharp little sequence that lasted less than a minute. My father sliding the envelope across the table, Candace angling her phone closer, my mother watching silently, my voice saying thank you for making it clear. It was everywhere. UNC alumni groups, local Charlotte business pages, a private leadership forum Olivia belonged to. The comments were predictable. Some people were angry on my behalf, some treated it like entertainment. A few strangers analyzed my expression frame by frame as if humiliation were a science experiment. But what mattered was not the comments. People had recognized Candace. She was not just someone's sister in that clip. She was a corporate attorney at a prominent Atlanta firm, a woman whose career depended on discretion and judgment. And she had live-streamed a legal humiliation involving a family trust. My phone vibrated while I was still staring at the screen. Candace. I answered. Her voice came through sharp and breathless. What the hell is wrong with you? I leaned against the kitchen counter of the apartment I had rented in Charlotte. Nothing is wrong with me. You need to get that video taken down. I looked at the screen again where the clip kept replaying in a small window. I did not post it. You are the reason it is spreading. No, the reason it is spreading is because you live streamed it. There was a short silence. My firm is asking questions, she said. Do you understand what kind of problem this creates? I watched a car pass slowly through the parking lot outside. I understand perfectly. You always do this. I almost laughed. Doing this in our family meant refusing to quietly accept blame for someone else's decision. Take it down, Candace said again. I cannot take down something I did not upload. You could tell people to stop sharing it. I thought about the hundreds of strangers already watching the moment my father cut me out of the family trust. You wanted witnesses, I said. Now you have them. She hung up. For a moment, I stood there with the phone still in my hand, feeling oddly calm. Something about the situation had finally become simple. The performance was over. The story now belonged to everyone who had seen it. An hour later, my father called. Gregory Hale did not bother with greetings. This has gone far enough. His tone sounded like a supplier had delivered the wrong shipment. You mean the dinner? I said. You are allowing this to damage the family. I stared at the blank white wall across the kitchen. You keep saying allowing, I said, as if I was the one holding the phone. People are making assumptions, he continued. Your mother has received messages. Candace has a situation at work. This is not how family matters are handled. You made it public. We addressed it privately. With a live stream? His voice hardened. You need to stop escalating this. I almost admired the logic. If the truth caused trouble, the person who refused to hide it must be the problem. I have not done anything, Dad. Do not play games with me. I am not. There was a long pause. You wanted distance from this family, he said. Now you have it. Do not turn around and punish us. Punish? That word stayed with me long after the call ended. Consequences were apparently a form of revenge when they happened to the wrong people. I booked the next flight back to Austin. Charlotte had become a strange place overnight. Every coffee shop conversation felt like it might include someone who had already seen the video. The flight gave me 2 quiet hours to think. I thought about the restaurant, about Candace holding her phone like a spotlight, about my father sliding the envelope across the table with the confidence of someone who believed the scene would end exactly the way he wanted. Then, I thought about the email that had arrived seconds after I walked out. Contract draft approved. By the time the plane landed, the humiliation felt less like an ending and more like a starting point. Arthur Chen was already in the office the next morning. Meridian Flow Systems had grown enough that we now had a real workspace in East Austin. Brick walls, glass conference rooms, engineers quietly arguing about dashboards. Olivia was at her desk near the window when I walked in. She turned around and studied my face. "You look like you slept about 40 minutes. That's generous." She stood and hugged me briefly. "I watched the clip," she said. "It's brutal. It's useful." She raised an eyebrow. "Only you would describe family humiliation as useful." Arthur appeared from the conference room carrying a tablet and a folder. "Good," he said. "Sit down." He spread several documents across the table. Hale Industrial Systems appeared clearly in the header of the contract draft, my father's company. The agreement covered the rollout of Meridian Flow Systems software across their distribution network, implementation phases, data migration, licensing. The total value sat near the bottom of the page, $3.4 million per year. Below that was the clause Arthur had insisted on during negotiations, 7.5% royalty on logistics optimization revenue generated through our system. Arthur watched my expression carefully. "They came back faster than expected," he said. "They're desperate." "That helps." I flipped through the pages, noting the small concessions their legal team had made overnight. The timelines alone told me everything. They needed results quickly. Arthur leaned back. "I need to ask one more time," he said. "Are you certain you want them as a client?" I thought about the dinner in Charlotte, about Candace holding her phone like a spotlight, about my father sliding the envelope across the table with the confidence of someone who believed the scene would end exactly the way he wanted. Then, I thought about the email that had arrived seconds after I walked out. Contract draft approved. By the time the plane landed, the humiliation felt less like an ending and more like a starting point. Arthur Chen was already in the office the next morning. Meridian Flow Systems had grown enough that we now had a real workspace in East Austin, brick walls, glass conference rooms, engineers quietly arguing about dashboards. Olivia was at her desk near the window when I walked in. She turned around and studied my face. "You look like you slept about 40 minutes. That's generous." She stood and hugged me briefly. "I watched the clip," she said. "It's brutal. It's useful." She raised an eyebrow. "Only you would describe family humiliation as useful." Arthur appeared from the conference room carrying a tablet and a folder. "Good," he said. "Sit down." He spread several documents across the table. Hale Industrial Systems appeared clearly in the header of the contract draft, my father's company. The agreement covered the rollout of Meridian Flow Systems software across their distribution network, implementation phases, data migration, licensing. The total value sat near the bottom of the page, $3.4 million per year. Below that was the clause Arthur had insisted on during negotiations, 7.5% royalty on logistics optimization revenue generated through our system. Arthur watched my expression carefully. "They came back faster than expected," he said. "They're desperate." "That helps." I flipped through the pages, noting the small concessions their legal team had made overnight. The timelines alone told me everything. They needed results quickly. Arthur leaned back. "I need to ask one more time," he said. "Are you certain you want them as a client?" I thought about the dinner in Charlotte, about Candace holding her phone like a spotlight, about my father sliding the envelope across the table with the confidence of someone who believed the scene would end exactly the way he wanted. Then, I thought about the email that had arrived seconds after I walked out. Contract draft approved. By the time the plane landed, the humiliation felt less like an ending and more like a starting point. Arthur Chen was already in the office the next morning. Meridian Flow Systems had grown enough that we now had a real workspace in East Austin, brick walls, glass conference rooms, engineers quietly arguing about dashboards. Olivia was at her desk near the window when I walked in. She turned around and studied my face. "You look like you slept about 40 minutes. That's generous." She stood and hugged me briefly. "I watched the clip," she said. "It's brutal. It's useful." She raised an eyebrow. "Only you would describe family humiliation as useful." Arthur appeared from the conference room carrying a tablet and a folder. "Good," he said. "Sit down." He spread several documents across the table. Hale Industrial Systems appeared clearly in the header of the contract draft, my father's company. The agreement covered the rollout of Meridian Flow Systems software across their distribution network, implementation phases, data migration, licensing. The total value sat near the bottom of the page, $3.4 million per year. Below that was the clause Arthur had insisted on during negotiations, 7.5% royalty on logistics optimization revenue generated through our system. Arthur watched my expression carefully. "They came back faster than expected," he said. "They're desperate. That helps." I flipped through the pages, noting the small concessions their legal team had made overnight. The timelines alone told me everything. They needed results quickly. Arthur leaned back. "I need to ask one more time," he said. "Are you certain you want them as a client?" I thought about the dinner in Charlotte, about Candace holding her phone like a spotlight, about my father sliding the envelope across the table with the confidence of someone who... Chapter 4. The boardroom where everything turned. I arrived in Raleigh on a cold, gray morning in January. The air outside Raleigh-Durham International Airport had that thin winter bite that North Carolina gets a few weeks every year. It was not dramatic weather, just cold enough to remind you the season had changed. Arthur had asked if I wanted him to pick me up. I told him no. This was something I needed to walk into on my own. The headquarters of Hale Industrial Systems looked exactly the same as it had when I was a teenager. A wide brick building surrounded by a parking lot full of pickup trucks and company SUVs. The company logo sat above the entrance in steel letters my grandfather had approved decades ago. For a moment, I stayed in the car with the engine running. This was the place where most of the assumptions about my future had been built. The place where my father had spent years explaining what responsibility looked like. Candace had been part of that future. I had not. Now I stepped out of the car and walked toward the glass doors. Inside, the receptionist looked up politely. I gave Arthur's name, and she nodded. "They are already in the boardroom," she said. Of course they were. The board meeting had been scheduled weeks earlier, after Hale Industrial lost another distribution contract and the pressure from investors started tightening. Arthur had been invited to present Meridian Flow Systems as a possible solution to stabilize their logistics network. What no one in that room knew yet was how closely that solution was tied to me. The hallway to the executive conference room smelled faintly of coffee and carpet cleaner. The same smell I remembered from childhood visits, when my father would bring Candace and me to the office on quiet summer days. Candace had loved those visits. She liked the attention, the way executives would greet her like she was already part of the leadership team. I reached the conference room door and paused for a second. Inside, I could hear Arthur speaking. His voice was calm, steady, the way it always sounded when he was explaining complicated systems to people who were not used to thinking about technology. I opened the door and stepped in quietly. The room was large, with a long, polished table that could seat at least 15 people. Several board members sat along the sides, laptops open, notepads filled with numbers. At the far end of the table, Gregory Hale sat with his hands folded in front of him, my father. Candace sat 2 chairs to his right, wearing a dark blazer and the kind of composed expression she used in courtrooms. No one noticed me immediately. Everyone's attention was focused on the presentation screen. Arthur stood beside the display. On the screen was the interface of Meridian Flow Systems. Data flowed across the dashboard in clean visual layers: shipping routes, inventory forecasts, supplier reliability metrics. Arthur moved through the explanation carefully. Our system analyzes historical shipping patterns and real-time supplier data to predict disruptions weeks before they appear in standard reporting. He tapped the screen, and a new projection appeared. Inventory balancing between distribution centers reduces storage costs while maintaining delivery timelines. One of the board members leaned forward. How quickly could something like this be implemented? Arthur answered without hesitation. Initial integration within 90 days, full operational deployment within 6 months. My father had been listening silently. Now he spoke. If these projections are accurate, he said slowly, this system could recover at least 15% of our current logistics losses within the first year. Arthur nodded. That estimate is conservative. Another board member looked at the cost slide. 3.4 million annually, he said. That is not insignificant. Neither are the contracts you have already lost, Arthur replied. A quiet murmur moved around the table. My father studied the numbers on the screen again. Then he leaned back slightly. Whoever built this platform understands manufacturing logistics extremely well. Arthur waited a moment. Then my father continued. Frankly, the person behind this system sounds like a genius. Arthur turned away from the screen. For the first time since I had entered the room, his eyes shifted toward me. He let the silence stretch just long enough for curiosity to settle over the table. The founder of Meridian Flow Systems is in this room, he said. Several heads turned. I stood up. The movement was small, but it cut through the quiet like a dropped glass. For a second, no one spoke. Then I looked directly at my father. Hello, Dad. The silence in the room became heavy. Candace stared at me as if her brain needed several seconds to process what she was seeing. One of the board members glanced between Arthur and me. You are saying she built this system? Arthur answered calmly. Yes. He stepped closer to the table. Meridian Flow Systems operates under a holding structure for strategic reasons. I represent the company publicly, but Hale is the founder and lead architect of the platform. Candace's expression shifted from confusion to something sharper. That is not possible, she said quietly. Arthur looked at her. Actually, it is. My father had not moved. His eyes had settled on me with a focus I had rarely seen before. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured. You built this? Yes. For a few seconds, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the projector. One of the board members cleared his throat. Mr. Chen, he said carefully, are you telling us the system we are negotiating to implement was created by Gregory Hale's daughter? Arthur nodded once. That is correct. Candace leaned forward suddenly. This is ridiculous. Her voice carried a sharp edge. If Marielle had built something like this, we would have known. I looked at her. You did know, I said quietly. She frowned. No. I remembered the dinner table in Raleigh years earlier, my MBA presentation, the polite laughter. Yes, I said. You just thought it was adorable. Candace's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. My father still had not taken his eyes off me. He reached slowly toward the printed contract sitting in front of him and turned one page. His gaze moved down to the name of the holding company that owned Meridian Flow Systems. For a moment, I watched the exact second understanding arrived. It showed first in his eyes, then in the way his shoulders shifted back against the chair. You planned this, he said. The accusation was quiet but clear. I felt something inside me settle. No, I said. Everything began when you decided to remove me from the family trust. Candace shook her head. You are saying this is revenge? I met her gaze. No, this is business. Arthur stepped forward again, his tone returning to the practical rhythm of the meeting. Hale Industrial Systems needs a logistics platform immediately to stabilize its supply chain and protect remaining contracts. He gestured toward the projections still displayed on the screen. Meridian Flow Systems is currently the only system configured specifically for companies operating within your distribution structure. One of the board members looked at my father. Gregory, he said carefully, the numbers support the proposal. Another member nodded. If this system performs as projected, it could prevent further contract losses. The conversation shifted back toward practical matters, integration timelines, training programs, data migration. I sat down again and listened while the board debated practical matters that would have sounded impossible in that room a few years ago. Eventually, the meeting reached its natural end. Chairs moved back, laptops closed, notepads gathered. People left the room slowly, many of them giving me long, curious looks as they passed. Candace left without speaking. Arthur packed his tablet quietly. My father remained seated at the table.
For a moment, neither of us moved. The conference room that had always belonged to him suddenly felt different. Not hostile, just unfamiliar. He looked at me again. "I thought you walked away from this company," he said. "I did." He glanced toward the contract. "Then you came back." I considered that for a moment. "No," I said. "You came to me." Neither of us spoke after that. The room fell into a thick silence that felt heavier than any argument. It was the silence of people who just realized that power inside a family can change without anyone asking permission. Chapter 5. What karma looks like a year later. The boardroom meeting did not explode the way dramatic stories often do. There was no shouting, no one stormed out, no one threw accusations across the table. Instead, everything changed quietly. In the weeks that followed, the consequences moved through our family like slow weather. The first wave did not reach me. It reached Candace. The live stream that she had treated like a clever moment on social media kept circulating long after the dinner ended. At first, it lived in alumni forums and local business circles. Then, someone clipped a shorter version, and it began appearing in legal discussion threads. Corporate attorneys talk to each other more than people realize. Professional reputation travels quickly in those circles. One morning, about 2 months after the dinner, Candace called again. Her voice sounded different this time. Not angry, tired. "They opened a review," she said. "What kind of review?" "An ethics review." I knew enough about large law firms to understand what that meant. Firms guard their reputations carefully. Broadcasting a family dispute that involved legal documents and financial trust issues was exactly the kind of situation partners hate seeing connected to their attorneys. "What happens now?" I asked. "They are investigating whether the live stream created a professional conflict." "And did it?" There was a pause. "That is not the point." But it was the point. The investigation dragged on through the spring. Interviews with partners, internal discussions, questions about judgment and discretion. By early summer, the firm suspended her from active cases. 3 months later, Candace left the firm entirely. The official explanation was that she wanted to pursue other opportunities. The unofficial explanation circulated quietly through legal circles. A lawyer who live streams family legal drama is not someone corporate clients trust easily. Her fiancé, Jordan Pierce, lasted longer than the job did. Jordan had always cared about stability, predictable plans, social image. For months, he tried to pretend the scandal was temporary. Then, one afternoon, Candace sent a short message to the family group chat. Jordan had ended the engagement. No explanation, no dramatic announcement, just a simple line that said the wedding would not happen. I did not respond. Not because I felt cruel, because by that point, the conversation between us had already ended. My mother's world shifted more slowly. Linda Hale had spent years building influence in local charity organizations across Raleigh. Fundraisers, board committees, public events where reputation mattered almost as much as generosity. The dinner video never fully disappeared from those circles. At first, people mentioned it quietly, then less quietly. By the end of the year, Linda stepped down from a leadership position in one of the charities she had been associated with for nearly a decade. Officially, it was for personal reasons. Unofficially, the board wanted less attention. Meanwhile, the business side of the story continued with none of the drama. Meridian Flow Systems began integrating with Hale Industrial Systems during the spring rollout. Engineers from my team worked with their logistics managers. Old inventory databases were cleaned, shipping patterns analyzed, warehouses mapped through our predictive models. Within the first quarter, the improvements were measurable. Delivery delays dropped, inventory overflow decreased. The distribution network began running with a level of coordination the company had never achieved before. Every quarter, Arthur received the performance reports. He would forward them to me with a short message. 6 figures again this quarter. Or sometimes just 2 words. Working well. For the first time in years, my father's company was stabilizing its operations using technology he once dismissed.
The irony was not lost on either of us. About 11 months after the dinner, Daniel Hargrove called again. By that time, the memory of the restaurant humiliation had faded into something quieter in my mind. It had become a story people occasionally referenced, rather than an open wound. Daniel's voice remained as careful as ever. "Miss Hale, the Whitmore Trust Clause has now completed its legal review period." I knew immediately what he meant. The house in Raleigh. The property where my parents still lived had technically been held in my grandmother's Eleanor Whitmore's trust for years. My exclusion from the Hale family trust triggered the transfer provision she had written before her death. The paperwork simply needed time to finalize. When the transfer completed, the house legally became mine. "Do they know?" I asked. "Yes," Daniel said. "Your parents have been notified." There was no anger in his voice, only the calm tone of a man who had delivered hundreds of uncomfortable legal truths during his career. "They have asked if they may discuss a residential agreement," meaning they wanted to stay. Meaning, for the first time in decades, my father was no longer the unquestioned owner of the house where our family history had taken place. We arranged a meeting, not in Raleigh, in a neutral office Daniel used for trust negotiations. Gregory and Linda Hale arrived together. They both looked older than I remembered from the night at the restaurant. No hostility filled the room, just a quiet awareness that the balance of things had shifted. Daniel explained the structure of the agreement, a lease agreement that would allow them to continue living in the house while the trust ownership remained under my control. My father listened carefully. At one point, he looked at me. "You could sell it," he said. "I could, but you will not." He was studying my face the way people study unfamiliar landscapes. "No," I said, "I will not." The meeting ended without conflict. Not reconciliation, just a practical understanding that the world had rearranged itself. By the end of 2025, Meridian Flow Systems had grown far beyond what Olivia and I imagined during those first months in a shared workspace. Our logistics platform was operating across several manufacturing networks in the Southeast. One morning, Arthur forwarded me an article from Forbes. The headline listed emerging technology companies reshaping industrial supply chains. Meridian Flow Systems was on the list. Olivia printed the article and taped it to the wall near her desk. "Not bad for an adorable startup idea," she said. We laughed about that for a long time. Almost exactly a year after the dinner in Charlotte, I found myself back there for a technology conference. On the last morning before my flight, I stopped at a small coffee shop near the hotel. I was standing in line when I noticed someone sitting alone near the window. Gregory Hale. For a second, I wondered if he had seen me already. Then he looked up. Our eyes met across the room. Neither of us seemed surprised. Time had softened the sharpness that once existed between us. Not erased it, just changed its shape. I picked up my coffee and walked toward the door. As I passed his table, he spoke quietly. "Marielle." I stopped. He looked like he wanted to say something else, an apology perhaps, or maybe a question. But the words never came. I nodded politely. Then I continued toward the exit. Outside, the air was cool and bright. As I walked down the sidewalk, I thought about that night in the restaurant when my family announced that I was no longer part of their future. They believed they were taking something away from me. In reality, they had done something very different. They had removed the last expectation that I needed their approval. The night they said I was no longer part of the family, they thought they had taken everything from me. The truth was much simpler. They had only helped me step away from something I was never meant to belong to. And if you have ever been underestimated or dismissed by people who believed they understood your limits, you probably know something important. Sometimes the strongest answer is not revenge. Sometimes it's silence, patience, and letting the truth unfold long enough for everyone to see it. If you understand that feeling, then you already know why some stories do not end with noise. They end with clarity.